lot of the women that I personally work with are already coming from that keto approach, right? They've already gone hardcore keto. And so they're actually trying to come back to the metabolic flexibility side on the other side of it. Whereas most people, I guess not most people, but a lot of people, and kind of the standard American diet is very high carb, right? So we have, people who might be a little bit more, overweight or insulin resistance. They're probably more on the end where they're metabolically inflexible in the sense of they're having a hard time using fat for fuel, and they've maybe never really tapped into ketones for fuel ever, right? So that's kind of one side of the spectrum, versus the other side of the spectrum, which we're seeing a lot more now with keto being very popular, is those people who are coming from that side, and they've actually trained their body to not really know how to utilize carbs effectively anymore because they've kind of down-regulated the enzymes that are necessary to digest those carbs and absorb them and use them efficiently and things like that. And then also kind of the emotional side of things, like we talked about, the carb phobic side of things there. So it really depends like what side of the spectrum they're coming from, but it all, and that's really where you're going to decide, okay, do we need to take more of a, where we're incorporating carbs back in or we're taking them out. And so with that, it's all about kind of titrating them in based off of where they're coming from. And for most of the women that I work with, they are, like I said, they are coming from that keto space. So we're looking to bring carbs back in the way that makes sense for them in terms of what their activity levels are. So, starting with titrating carbs in around their workout. So pre and post workout, pre-workout for that, energy boost, post-workout to help with that recovery, help bring cortisol down, things like that. Maybe before bed to help facilitate serotonin production and the kind of that calming effect that we know that carbs can have. So those are just some of the ways in which we do that. And it's really kind of, working with the individual and figuring out like where they're coming from and like what they need from both a physiological standpoint, but also a mental standpoint as well. And I think it also kind of tends to depend on where they're coming from, what side of the spectrum they're coming from, and also realize that like, I don't think there is any way to actually, say, hey, I'm as metabolically flexible as I can be. I feel like that in my eyes is kind of like the end goal, but we're never going to actually reach it because there's so many different things that we can do to, and it depends on where you're at in your life. And like I said, what your goals are and things like that. But yeah, I agree. I think it's really just, coming back to finding what works for you, but also finding that balance. And that's really the biggest thing. It's one of those things where like the education side of things and like working with the individual with what they're struggling with is super important. And really, I think that one of the biggest things aside from nutrition is just looking at everything else that's going on too. And that's what I like to take kind of like this full approach with all of my clients is like looking at their overall lifestyle. Like what is like their stress management like? What's their sleep like? What are these other things? Because these all play into like the recovery side of things and having them just feel good throughout the day, right? So that obviously nutrition is a huge piece of it, but the recovery side of things is something that I think, especially with a lot of women, especially if you're kind of more type A like I am, or at least I was, we always want to like go and do more and think that doing more is better, right? And not letting yourself recover. And that's a huge piece of the puzzle that I think a lot of people are missing. And, I missed that for myself for a while. And that's one of the biggest things I think within college athletics too, is like that recovery side of things. But then coming back to the fueling side, like I said, I think it's really big on education and like explain to them like, okay, this is why you need to be consuming this amount of protein because this is what happens, if you don't consume this amount of protein and this is how it's going to affect your performance or just calories in general, right? Like this is why you need this fuel, not only to perform, but to, like I said, recover and be able to, push yourself more. And I think I struggled a lot as I was an athletic trainer in grad school. I struggled explaining this to my athletes. And I think that there is, especially in college athletics, I feel like there is just a lot of, or not enough education when it comes to nutrition. I think we're getting better at it, but I think there's just still a lot of stuff that people are kind of stuck in the old textbooks and in the old ways of things that it's a little bit, it's a big struggle.